I landed in San Diego on a Thursday afternoon after 9 months in Poland. NATO logistics sounds impressive, until you realize it mostly means spreadsheets, cargo schedules, and making sure nothing important gets stuck in the wrong country. By the time my boots hit American pavement, I was exhausted in a way only deployment can produce. Not dramatic exhaustion, just bone-tired. I didn't ask anyone to pick me up. I wanted quiet. I wanted my own bed. I wanted to unlock my front door, drop my bags, and stand in a house that felt like mine. The Uber pulled up to the curb in front of my place in North County just before sunset. The sky looked like a postcard, the kind real estate agents use to justify a $2 million price tag. My garage door didn't open. I hit the remote again, nothing. That was odd. I had replaced the battery before I deployed. I stepped out, rolled my suitcase up the driveway, and punched in the keypad code on the garage. The screen flashed red. Wrong code. I stared at it for a second. I hadn't changed that code in 3 years. I walked to the front door and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I pulled it out, tried again. Same result. The key went in, but it wouldn't catch. The lock cylinder felt different. New. That was when I noticed the small printed notice taped to the inside of the glass panel beside the door. Property under family management per signed power of attorney. I read it twice. Then I checked the address at the top. My address. I stood there in my army uniform suitcase upright beside me, staring at my own front door like I'd shown up at the wrong house. Mrs. Delgado from next door stepped out onto her porch. "Oh, good, you're back," she called out. "Your sister said you were still overseas." I turned toward her slowly. "My sister, yeah. She's been staying here for a couple months. Said you didn't want the house sitting empty." "A couple months." I walked back to the door and rang the doorbell. No sound. I checked my phone. The Ring app showed the device offline. That meant someone had reset the Wi-Fi and reconnected everything. The deadbolt clicked from the inside. The door opened. Madison stood there like she was answering her own front door. Hair done comfortable, sweater barefoot. She looked relaxed, settled. Behind her I could see my living room furniture. My couch, my dining table, my artwork still on the wall. "Jordan," she said, blinking like she was surprised but not shocked. "You're home early." "Early. I texted you my flight details," I replied. She leaned casually against the doorframe. "Yeah, well, things changed." I looked past her. "Why doesn't my key work?" "Oh." She gave a small shrug. "We had to change the locks." "We? Who's we?" "Caleb and I, obviously." Her husband's truck was parked in my driveway. I felt something tighten in my chest, but it wasn't panic. It was calculation. "Why are the locks changed on my house?" I asked. She folded her arms. "It's under family management right now." I glanced at the paper taped inside the glass. "Power of attorney," I said flatly. She nodded. "You signed it before you deployed." I stared at her. "No, I didn't." "You did?" she insisted, tone already sharpening. "Mom and Dad were there. You said you didn't want to deal with property stuff while overseas. You weren't exactly in a stable headspace." There it was. Deployment equals unstable. I stepped closer. "Move. Jordan, don't do this. Move." She didn't. Caleb appeared behind her, broad-shouldered, trying to look calm. He'd lost weight since I last saw him. Stress does that. "Hey, man," he said like this was some casual misunderstanding. "Let's not escalate. You gave Madison authority. We've been taking care of the place." "By changing the locks," I asked. "Security," he replied. I set my suitcase down. "I want to see the power of attorney." Madison disappeared inside and came back with a folder. She held it out but didn't hand it to me. The document had my name at the top, my signature at the bottom. Black ink. I don't sign legal documents in black ink. I haven't in years. The notary stamp was legitimate. Commission number, expiration date. Everything looked official. Except I had never seen that paper before. "You're overreacting," Madison said. "You were deployed." We stepped in. "That's what family does." "That's not how power of attorney works." Caleb shifted his weight. "Look, we've been paying utilities, maintaining the yard. We even looked into refinancing to consolidate some things. You've got a lot of equity just sitting there." "Refinancing." I locked onto that word. "What did you just say?" He hesitated. "Nothing's finalized. Just exploring options." I stepped back from the doorway and pulled out my phone. Madison's expression changed. "Who are you calling?" "The police." Her jaw tightened. You're really going to do that? Yes. 20 minutes later, 2 San Diego County deputies stood in my driveway. They listened to both sides. Madison handed them the power of attorney. The older deputy studied it carefully. "Ma'am," he said to me, "this appears notarized." "It's forged," I replied. "Do you have proof?" "I was deployed in Poland on the date listed." He nodded. "That doesn't automatically invalidate it if it was signed prior." It wasn't. He looked at Madison. "You're currently residing here." "Yes," she answered quickly. "With written authority." The deputy turned back to me. "This is going to be considered a civil matter unless there's evidence of criminal entry. We can't force them out tonight." Tonight, I stared at my own front door while the sun dipped lower behind the rooftops. "So I don't have access to my own property," I said evenly. "You'll need to resolve this through the courts if you dispute the document." Madison exhaled slowly like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Caleb kept his eyes on the deputies. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "You're in the military?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Thank you for your service." That line always lands wrong in moments like this. The older deputy stepped back. "We recommend you seek legal counsel." They got in their cruiser and drove off. Silence settled over the driveway. Madison crossed her arms again. "You could have just talked to us. You changed the locks on my house. It's temporary, based on a document I didn't sign." She rolled her eyes. "You signed it. You just don't remember. You were under a lot of stress before deployment." That was when I knew this wasn't panic on their part. This was planned. I picked up my suitcase. "You can't just walk away," Madison said. "I'm not walking away." I turned toward the street. Caleb called after me. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." I didn't respond, because ugly isn't emotional. Ugly is paperwork, and I never sign legal documents without keeping a deployment copy. I drove straight to a Marriott 5 miles away and checked in without even looking at the room type. The front desk clerk thanked me for my service twice. I nodded, took the keycard, and went upstairs. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and recycled air. It wasn't home, but at least the locks worked. Inside the room, I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and pulled out my deployment binder. Every time I leave the country for extended orders, I make copies of anything important. Insurance, mortgage, title documents, contact lists. I don't do it because I'm paranoid. I do it because I'm in logistics. Redundancy keeps things from falling apart. I flipped through the binder until I found the section labeled Property. There was no power of attorney. There never had been. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. First call my mortgage lender. After 15 minutes navigating automated prompts, I reached a live representative. I verified my identity and asked a simple question. "Has there been any recent activity on my account?" A pause. "Yes, Captain Whitaker. We received a home equity line of credit inquiry about 3 weeks ago." Inquiry. Under whose authorization? "It was submitted with a power of attorney document naming Madison Whitaker as your authorized agent." I kept my voice steady. "Has any line of credit been opened?" "It's currently in underwriting review." "Freeze it." Another pause. "Ma'am, I'll need a formal fraud affidavit to do that." "You'll have it within the hour." I ended the call and drafted a fraud affidavit on my laptop. Clear, direct, no drama. I stated that I had not signed any power of attorney. I was deployed overseas on the date listed. I requested immediate suspension of any loan activity. I scanned my deployment orders and attached them. Then I emailed the documents to the fraud department. Second call, Fort Carson Legal Assistance. I explained the situation to the attorney on duty. He didn't sound shocked. "Forged POA cases aren't rare," he said, "especially when property and family mix." "That's comforting," I replied. "You'll want to document everything, and you need to report this through your chain of command." That part I already knew. Any incident involving identity misuse or financial investigation has to be disclosed if you hold a security clearance. I do. The next morning, I walked into my commander's office and laid it out clean. My sister changed the locks on my house while I was deployed. She presented a notarized power of attorney I didn't sign. They're attempting to open a HELOC. He didn't blink. "Are you financially compromised?" "No, sir." "Is there any indication of your involvement?" "No, sir." "Then handle it. But keep me informed. If this escalates, I need to know before it reaches brigade." "Fair enough." By that afternoon, the bank's fraud department called back. "Captain Whitaker, we verified through the Department of Defense database that you were on active deployment during the date listed on the power of attorney." I was. There are inconsistencies in the signature compared to prior documents on file. I assumed there would be. We are placing a temporary hold on the HELOC application pending further review. Good. Additionally, due to the amount requested, this may be escalated beyond internal underwriting. How much did they request? $500,000. I leaned back in my chair. $500,000. That wasn't consolidating some things. That was desperation. Has any money been disbursed? No. Keep it that way. That evening, Madison called. I let it ring twice before answering. What did you do? She demanded. I protected my property. You froze the loan. Yes. You're making this a federal issue. You made it a federal issue when you submitted a forged document to a federally insured bank. Silence. You're blowing this out of proportion, she said. We were just trying to use your equity responsibly. By pretending I signed a power of attorney, you did sign it. No. Her tone shifted. Jordan, you were stressed before deployment. You were barely sleeping. You might not remember. I remember exactly what I signed. Caleb's voice cut in from the background. You're putting us in a terrible position. You put yourselves there. We've been paying the utilities, he snapped. Maintaining the property. It's my property. You were gone. Yes, deployed. That doesn't mean we can't manage it. Not without my consent. Madison's breathing got heavier. You always act like you're the only responsible one. Like we're children. You changed the locks. You would have done the same. No, I wouldn't. I ended the call before it turned into a shouting match. The next week, the bank's fraud department contacted me again. This time, the tone was different. We've submitted a suspicious activity report, the investigator explained, given the amount requested and the discrepancies involved. What does that mean? It means this may be reviewed at a federal level. That wasn't theatrical. It was procedural. When a forged document is transmitted electronically across state lines in connection with a loan application, it doesn't stay local. It becomes wire fraud territory. Has the application been denied? I asked. It's suspended pending investigation. Good. I drove back to San Diego that weekend. Not to move back in, just to document. I stood across the street from my own house and watched Madison carry grocery bags inside. Caleb was in the driveway on his phone, pacing like he was negotiating something. They looked comfortable. That was the part that bothered me. Not the locks, not even the forged document. The comfort. I walked up the driveway and knocked. Caleb opened the door this time. You can't just show up, he said. It's still my address. Madison appeared behind him. Why are you here? To confirm something. I held up my phone. Did you submit any additional financial documents after the initial HELOC application? They exchanged a look too fast to hide. What are you talking about? She asked. The bank mentioned updated paperwork. Caleb's jaw tightened. That's between us and the lender. It's not. Madison stepped forward. You're trying to scare us with legal threats. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you. About what? That you just turned a family disagreement into something bigger. Caleb laughed once sharp and hollow. You think the FBI is coming for us over a loan application? I think federally insured banks don't like forged documents. Madison's voice dropped. You would actually send your own sister to prison. I looked at her. I didn't submit the paperwork. She stared back, trying to measure whether I was bluffing. I wasn't. Inside the house, my phone buzzed. I stepped aside and answered. Captain Whitaker, the fraud investigator, said, We forwarded your case to our legal compliance division. You may be contacted by additional authorities. I watched Madison's face as I listened. She didn't know who was on the other end of that call, but she could see it wasn't casual. I hung up. What was that? She asked. I met her eyes evenly. That was the bank confirming the review isn't internal anymore. I didn't raise my voice when I ended that call, but I didn't lower my eyes either. Madison studied my face like she was trying to decide whether this was still a family argument or something else. You're overcomplicating this, she said. Banks review things all the time. Not like this. Caleb crossed his arms. You think throwing around military terms makes you untouchable? This has nothing to do with being untouchable. It has to do with documentation. I stepped past them and looked into my living room. My couch had been rearranged. My framed deployment photo was gone from the wall. In its place was a large abstract canvas I didn't recognize. You redecorated, I said. Madison lifted her chin. We're living here, for now. Caleb gave a short laugh. You really think you're just going to snap your fingers and we disappear? No, I said calmly. I think paperwork will. I left before the conversation turned useless. Back in Colorado, I received a secure email from the bank's compliance division. The tone was clinical. They confirmed 3 things. 1, the HELOC application had been submitted electronically using the power of attorney document. 2, the requested line of credit was $500,000. 3, during identity verification, the system flagged that the primary property owner was on active duty status. That flag didn't exist because of magic. It exists because banks verify military status through the Department of Defense database before processing certain loans. It's routine. It's automated. And it means they don't just look at paperwork. They double-check it. The compliance officer asked if I was invoking protections under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Yes, I wrote back. RA doesn't make you immune to stupidity. It doesn't erase debt. What it does is slow things down and force lenders to confirm they aren't taking advantage of someone who can't physically show up to defend themselves. In this case, it meant the bank had to treat the entire transaction carefully. A week later, I was contacted by a representative from the bank's external investigative unit. Not law enforcement, not yet, but close. He asked for a detailed timeline. When was I deployed? Where was I on the date listed on the POA? Did I authorize anyone to manage my property? Did I provide any verbal consent? No, I said. And I have deployment records confirming I was overseas on the date of the notarization. He asked if I would submit a formal statement affirming the signature was not mine. I already have, I replied. He paused. Understood. Meanwhile, Madison's strategy shifted. She stopped arguing about the power of attorney and started attacking my credibility. My mother called on a Sunday afternoon. You've embarrassed your sister, she began without greeting. She forged my signature. She says you signed it before you left. I didn't. She said you were overwhelmed, that you asked her to handle things. Did you see me sign anything? A silence stretched across the line. Well, she said, did you see me sign anything? No. Then why would you tell anyone I did? Another pause. This one heavier. Jordan, your sister is under a lot of pressure. Caleb's business collapsed. They have children. I'm aware. You don't understand how hard it's been for them. I understand $500,000 was requested against my house. My mother inhaled sharply. You would really send your own sister to prison over money. This isn't about money. It sounds like it is. It's about identity fraud. She didn't respond to that. Most people don't like legal terms when they're applied to family. 2 days later, my commander called me in again. CID contacted Brigade, he said. Criminal Investigation Division. About me, I asked. Not as a suspect, as confirmation of your deployment status. I nodded. That was expected. You're not under investigation, he added. But your name is in a federal fraud inquiry. That means we monitor. I understand, sir. He studied me for a moment. Are you good? Yes, sir. I was. Angry, sure. But panic doesn't help paperwork. The following week, I received a call from the notary listed on the power of attorney. He sounded older than I expected. I've been informed there's a dispute regarding a document I notarized, he said. There is. I was told you signed it in front of me. I did not. He cleared his throat. Your father assured me you had signed earlier and were unable to attend in person due to travel. That's not how notarization works. I realize that now. Now, did you verify my identification? I was shown a copy of your driver's license. Did you witness me sign? No. There it was. Procedural negligence at best. Complicity at worst. He sounded shaken. I've provided a statement to the bank. Good, I said. When I hung up, I felt something different than anger. Disappointment. Not because a stranger had cut corners. Because my father had apparently stood there and allowed it. A few days later, the investigative unit informed me that the signature on the POA had been sent to a forensic document examiner. That's standard in high-value fraud cases. Handwriting analysis isn't TV drama. It's slow. It's methodical. It's expensive, which means they don't do it for small misunderstandings. I drove down to San Diego again that weekend. The front yard looked freshly edged. Caleb's truck was still in the driveway. Through the window, I could see my dining table covered in paperwork. When Madison opened the door, she didn't pretend anymore. What now, she asked. I was notified the signature is under forensic review. Her face tightened. You're unbelievable. No, I'm consistent. Caleb stepped into view. You think this is going to ruin us over a document technicality? It's not a technicality. You weren't even living here. I was deployed. He shrugged. Same difference. That sentence told me everything. To him, my absence was opportunity. To me, it was service. Inside, I heard one of their kids laughing at something on television. For a second, the whole thing looked normal. Family. Dinner prep. Weekend noise. Except the foundation of it was borrowed. And not legally. As I turned to leave, Madison called after me. "You're taking this way too far." I paused at the bottom of the driveway. "You submitted a $500,000 loan application using my name while I was overseas." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I got into my car. My phone buzzed before I even started the engine. The caller ID showed a federal number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Captain Whitaker," the voice asked. "This is Special Agent Collins. We need to discuss your property." I stayed in my car with the engine off while I took the call. "Captain Whitaker," the voice repeated. "Yes, this is Special Agent Collins with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Your mortgage lender filed a suspicious activity report related to a home equity line of credit application under your name." His tone wasn't dramatic. It was neutral, administrative. "I've been informed," I said. "We need to confirm a few details. Are you alleging the power of attorney used in that application is fraudulent?" "Yes." "Did you authorize anyone verbally or in writing to access your property equity?" "No." "Were you physically present in California on the date the POA was notarized?" "No, I was deployed in Poland. I can provide orders and location documentation." "We've already verified your active duty status through the Department of Defense database," he said. "We'll still need a formal sworn statement." "I'll provide one." He asked a few more procedural questions: timeline, who had access to my identification, whether I suspected financial motive. I answered without emotion. Facts are easier than feelings. "Thank you, Captain," he said before ending the call. "We'll be in contact." I sat there for a full minute after the line went dead. Across the street, Madison's curtains shifted slightly. She was watching. That night, my mother called again. "You've got federal agents involved now," she demanded. "They got involved when a forged document was submitted to a federally insured bank." "You're talking like a prosecutor." "I'm talking like someone who reads contracts. She's your sister, and that's my house." My father finally came on the line. His voice was tight. "You're destroying this family over paperwork." "It's not paperwork," I said evenly. "It's identity fraud. You signed that document." "I did not. I was there." "For what?" "For the notarization. You watched me sign it." Silence. "I was told you had signed earlier," he admitted. "So you didn't see me sign it?" "No." "And you still told a notary I had." He didn't answer. "You put your name behind a document I never executed," I continued. "Do you understand what that means? You're making it sound criminal." "It is criminal." My father exhaled hard into the phone. "You've changed since you joined the Army." "That's accurate." After I hung up, I drafted the sworn statement the FBI requested. Precise language. No exaggeration. I affirmed that I had not signed the power of attorney and that I had not granted authority for any equity withdrawal. The next morning, I submitted it through a secure portal provided by the agent. By midweek, the situation expanded beyond San Diego. My security manager at Fort Carson emailed me. "We've been notified of a federal financial investigation involving your identity. Please schedule a meeting." That's the part most people don't think about. When your name appears in a federal fraud case, even as a victim, it triggers review. Not punishment. Not accusation. Just scrutiny. I sat across from the security officer 2 days later. "Are you financially distressed?" he asked. "No." "Do you have any undisclosed debt?" "No." "Is there any evidence that you authorized the disputed transaction?" "No." He made notes, then looked up. "This will likely remain a monitoring issue until the investigation concludes. In other words, don't do anything stupid." That wasn't on my calendar. He almost smiled. Back in California, Madison's narrative escalated. She began telling extended family that I was overreacting due to deployment stress, that I'd become rigid, that I couldn't handle being back. One cousin texted me, "Are you okay?" Madison said, "You're not in a good place." I replied with one sentence, "I'm in a hotel because she changed the locks on my house." He didn't respond after that. Caleb called me late Friday night. "You've got agents contacting people," he said. "They contacted the notary. You're making this way bigger than it is. You submitted $500,000 in loan paperwork under my name. It wasn't approved. That doesn't make it legal. It's just a loan application, using forged authority." He went quiet for a beat. "We needed liquidity." "From my house." "You weren't using it." I almost laughed. "I was using it. I owned it." "You weren't even living there." "I was deployed." He didn't have a reply for that one. The following week, the forensic document examiner issued a preliminary finding. The signature on the power of attorney was inconsistent with known exemplars of my verified signature. That's polite language for not hers. Agent Collins called again. The forensic review supports your claim, he said. We're expanding the scope to include potential conspiracy and wire fraud. I kept my tone even. Understood. We'll likely need to execute additional document requests. There may be interviews. With whom? Anyone involved in the notarization and loan submission. That included my father. That evening, Madison showed up at my hotel. She stood outside the lobby doors, arms crossed, waiting. You didn't have to involve the FBI, she said the second I stepped outside. I didn't. The bank did. You could have withdrawn the complaint. It's not a complaint. It's a fraud affidavit. She stepped closer. Do you have any idea what this is doing to Mom and Dad? They vouched for a document I didn't sign. You're acting like we robbed you. You attempted to. No money moved. That's not the threshold for fraud. Her eyes filled with anger, not tears. You think you're better than us because you wear a uniform. No, I think I'm accountable for what I sign. You've always thought you were the responsible one. I am. That hit harder than I intended, but it wasn't false. She lowered her voice. Caleb's under pressure. His business collapsed. We were trying to stabilize. By leveraging my equity, we were going to pay it back. With what income? She didn't answer. You changed the locks, I continued. You told police you had authority. You tried to access $500,000. That's not stabilizing. That's escalation. She stared at me like she wanted me to back down. I didn't. This doesn't have to go to court, she said finally. It already has. That's not how this works, she snapped. It is now. She shook her head and walked back toward her car. Inside the hotel, I checked my phone. An email from the bank's compliance division had just come through. Subject line, funding attempt detected. Immediate review required. I opened it. The message was short. Despite the pending investigation, a secondary attempt had been made to initiate partial funding on the HELOC account earlier that day. Amount $125,000. I read the email twice to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. Despite the fraud affidavit. Despite the SCRA flag. Despite the federal review. Someone had attempted to initiate a partial draw of $125,000. I called the number listed in the email immediately. This is Captain Whitaker, I said when the compliance officer answered. I just received a funding alert. Yes, she replied. The system blocked the transfer automatically due to the investigation hold. Who initiated it? The authorized agent listed on the account. Madison Whitaker. Yes. I closed my eyes for a moment. So even after the fraud notice, they tried to pull funds? Yes. And it was denied. Yes. No money left the account. That was the only sentence that mattered. Please note in your file, I said calmly, that I did not authorize any funding attempt. It's already documented. After we hung up, I called Agent Collins. I assume you saw the attempted draw, I said. Yes, he replied. That changes things. In what way? Attempted funding after notification of dispute suggests knowledge. In plain English, it strengthens intent. Intent. That word carries weight in federal courtrooms. Does this accelerate anything, I asked? It narrows our timeline, he said. We're finalizing document subpoenas and preparing affidavits. For what? For potential charges. He didn't sound excited. He sounded procedural. I drove back to the house the next morning. Caleb's truck was in the driveway again. Madison's car beside it. Life looked normal from the outside. I knocked. Caleb opened the door, irritation already written across his face. What now, he asked. You tried to pull $125,000 yesterday. His jaw tightened. It didn't go through, he said. So you admit you initiated it? It's my wife's authority. It's not. He stepped out onto the porch, lowering his voice. We have bills. You have bills. You're acting like we're criminals. You submitted a forged power of attorney to access $500,000. That's not proven. The signature analysis says otherwise. His eyes flickered for a second. You had no right to drag handwriting experts into this, he said. I didn't. The bank did. Madison appeared behind him. You're trying to ruin us, she said. You attempted to draw funds after being notified of a fraud investigation. We needed to test if the hold was real. Caleb snapped. I stared at him. You just said that out loud. He realized it too late. Madison grabbed his arm. Stop talking. Too late. I don't need you to admit anything I said evenly. The bank logs everything. You're bluffing, Caleb said. But it lacked conviction. I don't bluff paperwork. Madison's composure cracked slightly. You're seriously going to let federal agents drag us through court? You chose that when you hit submit. She shook her head. You're heartless. No, I said. I'm consistent. I left before the conversation spiraled. 2 days later, Agent Collins called again. We executed additional document requests this morning, he said. On whom? The notary, the lending officer who processed the submission, and both applicants. That includes my sister and her husband. Yes, our charge is being filed. We're preparing a case packet for the U.S. Attorney's Office. I let that settle. That meant the investigation was no longer exploratory. It was directional. Back at Fort Carson, the clearance monitoring remained active. My security officer called me in briefly. Any updates, he asked. Federal review in progress, I replied. You're not implicated. No, then stay squared away. That's military for don't give us another problem. Meanwhile, family pressure intensified. My aunt left a voicemail saying I should handle this privately. A cousin texted asking if I could drop the charges. I hadn't filed charges. A federally insured bank had reported fraud. There's a difference. Madison tried another angle. She sent an email. Subject, let's fix this. She wrote that they were willing to move out quietly if I withdrew my statement. I responded with one line. There is no statement to withdraw. She called within minutes. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding, she said. It wasn't. You can say you forgot signing. I didn't forget. You're choosing the government over your family. I'm choosing documentation over fiction. You're unbelievable. So was the funding attempt. She hung up. Later that week, the forensic document examiner issued a final report. The signature on the power of attorney was highly probable to be a simulation, meaning intentionally forged. Agent Collins sent a brief confirmation. The report supports criminal referral. I forwarded the email to no one. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't victory. It was inevitability. Friday afternoon, I received another call from the FBI. Captain Whitaker, Agent Collins, said we've completed interviews with the notary and reviewed electronic submission logs. And there's clear evidence of coordinated action, meaning the POA was submitted digitally from an IP address registered to your residence. I almost smiled at the irony. My residence that I can't enter. Yes, he continued. Additionally, the lending portal required acknowledgement of active duty status. That acknowledgement was bypassed. How? By selecting no when asked if the property owner was on active duty. That detail mattered, because the system had automatically flagged me as active duty during verification, which meant someone intentionally tried to override that disclosure. Is that significant? I asked. Yes, he said. It demonstrates awareness. Awareness leads to intent. Intent leads to charges. Are you prepared to testify if necessary? He asked. Yes. Understood. That weekend I drove by the house again. Madison was in the yard trimming hedges. She looked tired. Caleb wasn't outside. When she saw my car slow, she stopped cutting and just stared. For a moment, neither of us moved. She walked toward the curb. They talked to Caleb, she said quietly. I assumed they would. He didn't think it was serious. It was. You could still stop this. No. She looked at me like she was searching for something human to appeal to. You'd really watch him go to prison. I didn't submit the paperwork. She swallowed. They're saying things like wire fraud, she whispered. That's because documents were transmitted electronically. You sound like you're explaining a math problem. It's not complicated. Her shoulders sagged. You don't understand what this will do to us. I shifted the car into park. You don't understand what you did. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen and froze. I watched her expression change. Not anger, not denial. Recognition. She lowered the phone slowly. They're coming back, she said under her breath. I stepped out of the car before I even realized I'd turned off the engine. Who's coming back? I asked. Madison looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to answer. Agents, she said finally. They called Caleb. About what? They want him to come downtown Monday morning. That's usually not for coffee. She shot me a look. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. She pressed her lips together. They're saying the U.S. Attorney's Office is reviewing charges. That was fast. Not unrealistic. Just fast enough to feel real. Did they say what charges? I asked. Bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. Her voice dropped on the last one. That sounds extreme. It's descriptive. She stared at me like I was speaking another language. You really think he's some criminal mastermind? She asked. No, I think he made a series of bad decisions and documented them. That's not the same thing. In federal court it is. She looked back at the house. Through the open garage, I could see cardboard boxes stacked near the wall. They hadn't been there before. You packing? I asked. She hesitated. We thought maybe it was smarter to prepare. For what? In case we need to move out. I nodded once. That would have been smarter before the funding attempt. She winced. I told him not to try pulling the money again, she said quickly. So you knew about it? Her silence answered for her. A black SUV turned the corner at the end of the street. Not dramatic, just noticeable. Madison saw it too. "That's them," she whispered. The vehicle slowed in front of the house. 2 agents stepped out. One of them I recognized from a prior call, Agent Collins. The other I hadn't met. They approached without urgency. No lights, no sirens, no show. Collins nodded at me briefly. "Captain?" "Agent." He turned to Madison. "Mrs. Whitaker." She nodded stiffly. "Is Mr. Price inside?" "Yes. We need to speak with him." She stepped aside automatically, like she'd been rehearsing that movement. Caleb appeared in the doorway seconds later. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Is this necessary?" he asked. "Yes," Collins replied calmly. "We're here regarding the HELOC application and related documentation." "It didn't even go through," Caleb said. "That's not the threshold," Collins answered. Caleb glanced at me. "You happy?" he muttered. I didn't respond. The second agent handed him a folder. "This is a formal notice to appear before a federal magistrate," he said. "You are not under arrest at this time, but you are required to attend." Madison grabbed the edge of the door. "Arrest," she repeated. Collins didn't soften his tone. "The U.S. attorney is reviewing multiple counts including attempted bank fraud and wire fraud." Caleb's jaw clenched. "This is insane," he said. "We were just trying to access equity." "Using a forged power of attorney," Collins said. Caleb's eyes flicked toward Madison for half a second. That was enough. "Do you have anything you'd like to clarify now?" Collins asked. "No," Caleb replied quickly. "Then we'll see you Monday morning." The agents turned and walked back to their SUV. No handcuffs, no spectacle, just paperwork. Madison shut the front door slowly after them. I stayed in the driveway. A minute later, she opened it again. "They're not arresting him today," she said, almost hopeful. "Not today." She swallowed. "You could still tell them you don't want to pursue this." "I'm not pursuing anything." "You filed the affidavit." "Yes." "You could withdraw it." "That's not how federal referrals work." Her frustration spiked. "You act like you're above all of this." "I act like I read what I sign." Caleb came back outside, folder in hand. "They're saying up to 30 years, he said flatly. "That's statutory maximum," I replied. "Not a sentence." He stared at me. "How do you even know that?" "I research before I panic." "This is your fault." "No," I said. "It's the application's fault." He shook his head. "You're supposed to be family." "I was. Until you changed the locks." He stepped closer. "We were drowning. You don't get to use my name as a life raft." Madison put a hand on his arm. "Stop," she whispered. He pulled away. "They don't even have money moved," he argued. "No damages." "Attempted fraud counts," I said. "You'd really testify?" "Yes." That answer seemed to land differently. Not as anger, as certainty. He looked back at the house again. "We thought because you were deployed." He started then stopped. "Because I was deployed what I asked. Because you couldn't deal with it." There it was. Not ignorance. Assumption. He assumed my absence meant weakness. He assumed paperwork signed overseas wouldn't matter. He assumed equity was just idle cash. He assumed wrong. Madison looked at me, not defiant anymore. Just calculating. "If we move out," she said carefully, "does that help?" "It doesn't undo electronic records." She closed her eyes briefly. Inside, one of the kids called her name. Real life still happening in the background. Collins' SUV disappeared down the street. Caleb flipped open the folder again, scanning the pages like he expected the text to rearrange itself into something softer. "It says preliminary appearance," he muttered. "Bond hearing." Madison's voice trembled slightly. "Bond? That's for criminals." "It's for defendants," I corrected. They both looked at me like I was already standing on the other side of something. "I didn't call them," I said evenly. "The bank did." Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "And you think you're just neutral in this?" "I'm consistent." Madison's shoulders sagged. "Mom's going to lose her mind," she said. "She vouched for the document. She trusted us." "That was a mistake." Caleb stepped back toward the door. "I need to call a lawyer," he said. "That would be smart," I replied. He paused. "You're enjoying this?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm documenting it." He didn't answer. The door closed again. I stood in the driveway a few seconds longer, then got back in my car. As I pulled away, my phone buzzed. An email from the bank. Subject line, "Case status update. Escalated to prosecution review." Inside, one line stood out. "Given the attempted secondary funding, the matter has been referred for expedited review." Expedited. Not dragged out. Not hypothetical. Procedural. I glanced in the rear-view mirror at the house shrinking behind me. 2 months ago, I was coordinating supply routes in Eastern Europe. Now I was reading federal escalation notices tied to my own address. Deployment teaches you contingency planning. It doesn't teach you how to plan for your sister changing your locks and gambling with your name. But it does teach you one thing. Stay steady when everyone else starts scrambling. I didn't plan on being in San Diego for Thanksgiving, but federal timelines don't care about holiday schedules. Caleb's preliminary appearance was set for the Monday before Thanksgiving week. I flew in Sunday night and checked into the same hotel. I wasn't there to watch him get processed. I was there because my address was still tied to the case. Monday morning, the federal courthouse in downtown San Diego looked exactly like every other federal building, glass concrete and zero emotion. I sat in the back of the courtroom. Caleb stood at the defense table beside a court-appointed attorney. He looked smaller without a driveway and a front door to stand in front of. The charges were read clearly: attempted bank fraud, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft. No raised voices, no dramatic pauses, just statutes and code numbers. The prosecutor outlined the basics: a forged power of attorney electronic submission of loan documents, attempted draw of funds after notice of dispute false declaration regarding active duty status. When the magistrate asked about employment, Caleb's attorney mentioned his failed construction business. When the magistrate asked about ties to the community, Madison stood and identified herself as his spouse. Bond was discussed. The prosecutor noted the attempted secondary funding as evidence of ongoing risk. Caleb was granted conditional release pending further proceedings, but with restrictions. No new lines of credit. No financial transactions over a certain threshold. Surrender of passport. Not prison, not freedom either. Outside the courtroom, Madison spotted me before I reached the exit. "You didn't have to be here," she said. "It's my case too. You're enjoying watching this." I'm observing. Her eyes were red but dry. They're making him sound like some white-collar criminal. He submitted documents electronically to obtain money he wasn't authorized to access. You make it sound simple. It is. She leaned closer. Mom and Dad are hosting Thanksgiving like nothing is happening. That's ambitious. They expect you to come. I don't think that's a good idea. You're still family. I looked at her. That's under review. She flinched. By Wednesday afternoon, the family group text was active. My mother sent a long message about gratitude and unity. No mention of court. No mention of federal charges. I responded with a single line: "I'll stop by briefly." Thanksgiving at my parents' house felt staged. The table was set like always: turkey casseroles, pie, football on in the background. My father carving meat like nothing had shifted. Madison and Caleb arrived late. Caleb avoided eye contact. Madison hugged everyone tightly as if proximity could fix paperwork. When she reached me, she hesitated. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know." Dinner started. For the first 10 minutes, everyone performed normalcy. Then my uncle asked Caleb how business was going. Silence stretched across the table. "Transitioning," Caleb said carefully. My father cleared his throat. "Let's keep today positive." I took a sip of water. Positive doesn't erase subpoenas. Halfway through the meal, my mother set down her fork. "Jordan," she began, "are you really prepared to see this through?" "Yes." "You could still tell them you don't want to cooperate." "I don't control federal prosecution." "You're the complaining witness. I'm the property owner." Madison's voice cut in. "You don't have to testify." "If subpoenaed, I do." My father slammed his hand lightly against the table. "This is tearing us apart." It was torn when the locks were changed. "That was temporary," he snapped. "So was the loan attempt." The room went quiet. My aunt shifted uncomfortably. Caleb finally spoke. "We thought because you were overseas it wouldn't escalate like this." "There it is," I said. He frowned. "What? You thought deployment meant distance." "No, we thought it meant you wouldn't care." I let that hang. Across the table, my cousin stared at Caleb like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. "You tried to take money from her house," he asked bluntly. "It was a loan, Madison's insisted. We were going to pay it back." With what I asked calmly, Caleb pushed his chair back slightly. "This is pointless." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." My mother's voice cracked. "Can't we just move forward?" "We are," I said. After dessert, people began drifting into the living room. I stepped outside onto the porch for air. My father followed. "You could have handled this privately," he said. "How?" "You could have worked out a repayment plan for money that wasn't authorized to be taken." They were desperate. That doesn't change federal law. He looked older than I remembered. "You're choosing the system over blood. I'm choosing accountability over denial." Inside laughter rose briefly from the living room, forced and loud. My father stared at the yard. "Do you realize what a conviction will do to your sister?" "Yes." "And you're okay with that?" "I didn't file the loan." He shook his head slowly. "You've become cold." "No," I said. "I've become structured." Back inside, Madison stood near the kitchen island scrolling on her phone. Her expression shifted suddenly. What my mother asked. Madison looked up. They just updated the docket, she said quietly. Updated how Caleb asked. She swallowed. They added an additional count. Caleb's face drained of color. What count? My father demanded. Madison's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Conspiracy. Madison was still staring at her phone when the knock hit the front door. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just firm. Everyone in the living room froze at the same time. My mother looked toward the hallway like maybe it was a neighbor. My father stood up slowly as if moving carefully could change who was on the other side. The knock came again. Caleb muttered something under his breath and walked toward the door. Madison followed 2 steps behind him. I stayed where I was. The door opened. Agent Collins stood on the porch with another agent beside him. No lights. No sirens. Just dark jackets and badges clipped at waist level, Mr. Price, Collins said evenly. We need a moment. My father stepped forward. It's Thanksgiving. Yes, sir, Collins replied. We're aware. Caleb's voice was tight. My attorney said we'd have notice. You do, Collins said. You've been indicted. The word landed hard. Madison gripped the edge of the door for what she demanded. Collins didn't raise his voice. Attempted bank fraud. Wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. My mother gasped behind me. Caleb tried to laugh, but it didn't connect. Indicted doesn't mean convicted. No, Collins agreed. It means charged. The second agent stepped forward with paperwork. Mr. Price, there is an arrest warrant signed by a federal judge. Silence swallowed the porch. Madison shook her head. No, you said he wasn't under arrest. That was before the grand jury returned an indictment, Collins said calmly. Caleb looked at me. You push this, he said. I didn't respond. Collins stepped closer. Mr. Price, please turn around. Caleb hesitated just long enough to make it worse. Do not make this harder, Collins added. The cuffs clicked into place. Not loud, not cinematic, just metal doing its job. My mother started crying immediately. My father grabbed the door frame like he needed it to stay upright. This is unnecessary, Madison said, voice breaking. He wasn't going anywhere. The attempted secondary funding after notification of investigation demonstrated ongoing intent, Collins replied. That influenced the court's decision. There it was again. Intent. Caleb's head turned toward Madison as the agent guided him down the porch steps. You told me it wouldn't go this far, he said. She didn't answer. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on one by one. Curtains shifted. No one shouted. No one filmed. It wasn't that kind of neighborhood. The agents led Caleb to the SUV parked at the curb. Madison took a step forward. Can I at least? You can contact his attorney, the second agent said. He'll have a bond hearing. The door shut. The SUV pulled away without sirens. The street returned to its normal suburban quiet, like nothing had happened, except everything had. Madison stood in the driveway staring at the empty space where the vehicle had been. My father turned toward me. Are you satisfied? He asked. No. Then what do you want? Documentation. My mother sobbed into a napkin. You've destroyed your sister's life, she said through tears. She submitted the paperwork, I replied. Madison walked slowly back toward the house. This isn't just about Caleb now, she said without looking at me. No, I agreed. It isn't. She turned sharply. They're charging conspiracy. Yes. They're saying I was part of it. You were. Her jaw tightened. I never logged into the bank portal. You stood behind a forged power of attorney. That's not the same. In federal court it can be. She laughed once, brittle. You really did choose the system. I chose the truth. You think this makes you righteous? No, it makes you cold. I met her eyes. You changed the locks. She flinched. Inside the house, plates were still on the table. Turkey half carved. Football commentators still talking on the television. Normal life interrupted by formal charges. My father sank into a chair. What happens now? He asked. Arraignment, I said. Pretrial motions. Possible plea negotiations. You talk like you're the prosecutor, Madison snapped. I read the indictment summary. She shook her head slowly. They'll drop it, she said. But it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. No money was taken. Attempted fraud counts. Stop saying that. It doesn't stop being true because it's uncomfortable. My mother stood up abruptly. This is enough. Not tonight. I agreed. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. You're leaving? My father asked. Yes. After this, yes. Madison's voice followed me toward the door. You could still refuse to testify. If subpoenaed, I won't. You'd put me on the stand, if required. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. Outside, the air felt colder than it had an hour earlier. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. An email notification from the U.S. District Court. Case update filed. I opened it before I even reached the driver's seat. The indictment listed both defendants clearly. Caleb Price, Madison Whitaker. Additional count aggravated identity theft. Mandatory minimum 2 years if convicted. I sat in the car with the engine off, reading the document line by line. Across the street, my parents' porch light remained on. Inside silhouettes moved slowly through the living room. Family, paper plates, federal charges. I started the engine. As I pulled away, I checked the rearview mirror one last time. The house looked the same as it always had. 2 stories. Neutral paint. Clean landscaping. You couldn't tell from the outside that a grand jury had just decided the next several years of someone's life might be spent in a federal facility. Paperwork doesn't make noise. It just changes trajectories. I didn't attend every hearing after the indictment, but I attended the ones that mattered. Arraignment was procedural. Pleas of not guilty. Trial dates discussed. Motions filed. Lawyers earning their hourly rates. Reality settled in slowly for Madison. It hit Caleb faster. Within 3 weeks of the arrest, Caleb's attorney approached the U.S. attorney about a plea agreement. The evidence wasn't subtle. Electronic submission logs tied to my home IP address. The forged power of attorney. The attempted secondary draw after notification of investigation. The false active duty disclosure. Intent was documented in timestamps. I was notified by the prosecutor's office that plea negotiations were underway. They asked whether I had any restitution claims beyond legal costs. I want title clarity and full protection of my property, I said. Nothing else. Money wasn't the point. Control was. In early spring, Caleb changed his plea. Guilty to 1 count of attempted bank fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. The wire fraud and conspiracy counts were dismissed as part of the agreement. Mandatory minimum on identity theft 2 years. The attempted bank fraud carried additional exposure. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning. Caleb wore a suit that didn't fit quite right. He looked smaller again, like he had in that first courtroom appearance. The prosecutor laid out the timeline cleanly. Deployment, forged POA, loan application, secondary funding attempt, continued misrepresentation after notification. Caleb's attorney argued desperation, financial collapse, no actual funds disbursed. Family conflict spiraled out of control. The judge listened. When it was my turn to speak as the victim, I stood. I was deployed overseas when my property was accessed without authorization, I said. The forged document was used to attempt to obtain $500,000. That action triggered a federal investigation that affected my security clearance and military standing. I did not consent to any of it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. The judge nodded once. Caleb was sentenced to 36 months in federal custody. 3 years. Not the maximum. Not a slap on the wrist. Enough. Madison stood behind him during sentencing. She didn't cry until the judge finished speaking. Her case moved separately. The government offered her a deal, pled guilty to conspiracy to commit financial fraud in exchange for probation and restitution. She took it. At her hearing, she avoided looking at me entirely. The judge emphasized that while no funds were successfully withdrawn, the attempt itself constituted serious misconduct, particularly involving an active duty service member. Madison received 3 years probation, financial restitution obligations, and a permanent felony record. No prison. But no clean slate either. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't national news. It was just federal paperwork playing out the way it usually does. My parents' financial situation deteriorated quickly. Legal fees drained most of their retirement savings. My father had co-signed documentation related to the notarization. He wasn't charged, but attorney consultations aren't free. One afternoon he called. "We're refinancing our house," he said quietly, "to pay legal bills." "Yes." I didn't offer commentary. "You won," he added. "This wasn't a competition." "It feels like one." "It was documentation." He sighed heavily. "Madison says you've cut her off completely." "I haven't contacted her. She's humiliated. She changed the locks." That sentence had become a marker, a line in the sand. A month after sentencing, I returned to San Diego to finalize property restoration. Madison and Caleb had moved out weeks earlier. The house was empty when I unlocked it. My key worked again. The locksmith invoice was already paid. By me. Inside the furniture was mostly intact, but the rearrangements remained. My framed photos were stacked in a closet. Some small items were missing, nothing worth pursuing. I walked through each room slowly, no emotion, just inventory. Utilities back in my name exclusively. Security system reset. Wi-Fi reestablished. Ring cameras reactivated. I installed a new deadbolt system that required dual authentication through my phone. Overkill, maybe. But paperwork had taught me something about assumptions. As I stood in the kitchen, my phone buzzed. An email from my security manager at Fort Carson. Subject clearance review update. I opened it. The monitoring review associated with the federal fraud case has concluded. No adverse findings. Clearance remains active. I read it twice. No adverse findings. That mattered more than the sentencing. 3 weeks later, I stood before a promotion board. My record was clean. My deployment evaluation strong. The federal case noted but not as misconduct. 6 months after the sentencing, I received official notification. Promoted to major. It wasn't related to the case. It was earned long before any of this started. But timing has a sense of irony. The day I pinned on major, my mother texted, "Congratulations." I replied with a simple thank you. No emojis, no sentiment. Madison didn't reach out. Caleb began serving his sentence in a low-security federal facility in Arizona. My father sent occasional updates about visiting schedules. I didn't ask for them. Back at the house in San Diego, I finalized a property trust structure with an attorney. The title remained in my name, but operational control was clearly defined and insulated. Not from strangers. From assumptions. One evening, standing in the living room, I looked at the front door. New locks. My locks. The same door that had been opened to me with someone else standing inside claiming authority over my address. The house felt quiet again. Not peaceful. Structured. Family didn't collapse overnight. It shifted. Holidays became smaller. Conversations shorter. Boundaries clearer. No dramatic reconciliation. No apology tour. Just consequences and adjustments. When people ask whether it was worth it, I don't answer emotionally. I answer accurately. A forged power of attorney triggered a federal fraud case. A federal fraud case triggered sentencing. Sentencing triggered financial collapse for people who thought documentation was flexible. And the locks? They work exactly the way they're supposed to now. They open when the right key turns. I didn't celebrate my promotion with a party. I pinned on major in a quiet ceremony on base, shook hands, signed paperwork, and went back to work. The Army doesn't pause because your personal life detonated and rebuilt itself. It just updates your rank and expects you to perform. The clearance review was officially closed by then. No flags, no concerns. The federal case had been categorized exactly how it was supposed to be: identity misuse, victim reporting cooperation. Nothing else. That mattered. In my line of work, reputation isn't about popularity. It's about reliability. A month after the promotion, I flew back to San Diego again. Not because of court, not because of agents, just because it was my house and I felt like being there. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. Same trimmed hedges, same mailboxes, same Mrs. Delgado watering her plants at 4 p.m. She waved when she saw me park. "Everything settled?" she asked carefully. "Yes," I said. That was a lot. It was. She nodded once and went back to her garden. Suburbs are good at moving on. Inside the house, I walked straight to the hallway where the original notice had been taped to the glass panel months earlier. Property under family management per signed power of attorney. I could still see the faint residue where the tape had been. I didn't scrape it off immediately. I wanted to look at it, not as trauma, not as anger, as documentation. I had installed upgraded security cameras and reinforced door hardware. The locksmith had explained the features in detail. Deadbolt reinforcement plate, anti-pick cylinder, smart lock audit logs. Overkill for a quiet neighborhood, necessary for clarity. I had also met with an estate attorney and structured the property inside a revocable trust with specific management limitations. No general power of attorney authority over real estate transactions without dual notarization and live identity verification. If someone ever wanted to manage my house again, it would require more than a printer and misplaced confidence. My father called that evening. I heard you were in town, he said. Yes. He paused, then continued. Your mother wants to see you. I'm at the house. Another pause. Madison moved into a rental in Temecula, he said. I know. She's working part-time. I know. She doesn't talk about the case anymore. I'm not surprised. He cleared his throat. We've had to make adjustments. I imagine. He sounded tired. Not angry, not defensive, just older. Your mother and I refinanced. Sold some investments. It'll take time. I didn't ask you to cover legal fees. She's our daughter. And I'm not. The silence answered more than he meant it to. I didn't mean it like that, he said quickly. I know. He shifted the conversation. Are you staying long? A few days. Will you come by? I'll think about it. I ended the call without committing. That night I walked through each room again. Living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, master bedroom. Nothing dramatic. Just space that belonged to me again. The next afternoon, Madison showed up. No warning, no text. She stood at the front door, hands in the pockets of a light jacket. I checked the camera feed before opening it. She looked smaller than I remembered. I unlocked the door. What do you want? I asked. To talk. I stepped aside but didn't invite her in further than the entryway. She noticed. You don't trust me, she said. That's accurate. She nodded slowly. I'm not here to fight. Then talk. She glanced around the foyer. It looks the same. It is. She took a breath. Caleb's adjusting. That's good. He says 3 years will go by fast. That depends. She swallowed. I know I messed up. Yes. I didn't think it would turn into that. You submitted federal loan documents with a forged signature. We were desperate. That doesn't change the action. She looked down at the floor. I thought because you were deployed, you'd never know. There it was again. Assumption. I always know what I sign, I replied. I know that now. She shifted her weight. Mom says you won. I didn't compete. It feels like you did. I shook my head slightly. This was never about beating you. Then what was it about? Boundaries. She looked up at me finally. You could have handled it differently. How? You could have warned us before going to the bank. I did. I asked to see the document. You doubled down. She didn't argue that. I'm on probation, she said quietly. Every financial transaction is monitored. That's part of sentencing. You're really okay with that. I didn't design the system. She almost smiled at that. Almost. I miss how things were, she said. Before the locks. She didn't answer. I'm not cutting you off completely, I continued. But access is over. To what? To assumption. To authority. To anything that requires my signature. She nodded once. That's fair, she said. We stood there in the entryway, the new lock system humming faintly behind us. She looked at the door. You changed everything. No, I said. You did. She let out a slow breath. I'm trying to fix what I can. Then start with honesty. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then stepped back outside. I'm glad you got promoted, she said quietly. Thank you. She walked down the driveway without looking back. I locked the door and checked the audit log on my phone. Door secured. Authorized access only. I walked back into the living room and sat on the couch. Deployment teaches discipline. It teaches patience. It teaches that distance doesn't equal weakness. What it doesn't teach is how to respond when someone decides your absence is their opportunity. That part you learn on your own. The house was quiet. Not empty. Not tense. Just steady. And the locks worked exactly the way they were supposed to. I didn't go to war. I went to Poland to move equipment track shipments and make sure other units had what they needed. It wasn't glamorous. It was structured, predictable, accountable. What surprised me wasn't federal court or forensic reports. It was how easily family can convince themselves that access equals entitlement. That being deployed means being distracted. That changing the locks on a $2 million house is just a temporary solution instead of a permanent line crossed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ownership. About the fact that service doesn't cancel your rights. About how paperwork, when used correctly, protects you better than anger ever will. My sister changed the locks while I was deployed. She had no idea what that decision would set in motion. Not because I'm powerful, not because I'm ruthless, but because systems exist for a reason and actions have weight. Family doesn't give you authority over someone else's name, property, or sacrifice. And once that line is crossed, the only thing left is clarity. The locks work now. The paperwork is clean. The boundaries are real. That's enough. If you follow family revenge stories grounded in real consequences, especially ones involving military service, legal accountability, and real-life financial fallout, make sure you subscribe. I share stories where the drama isn't exaggerated, it's documented. And sometimes the quietest response carries the heaviest outcome.